Hey guys, today's issue prompt comes to us from California, from a guy named Sunit. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. The date is April 22nd, 2019, and as you can see, this is an issue prompt. It says, the best way for society to prepare its young people for leadership in government, industry, or other fields is by instilling in them a sense of cooperation, not competition. So before I look at Sunit's essay, how would I plan this? All right, we got some purple going on. So let's say I mostly agree. I think competition's a good thing. I'm sorry, cooperation's a good thing. Competition's not a good thing. My body one, I could say that modern governments rely heavily on cooperation. And then I could give examples, checks and balances. You got the executive branch and the legislative branch. And the judiciary, and inside the legislative branch, if there's no cooperation, it's very difficult for laws to get made, something like that. Body two, I could say something, to support this. Too much competition can spell disaster for a country's political, politics. And a very good example would be something like ancient Rome, when you had so much competition between the consuls and the senators, and you had Caesar on one hand, and then there was Pompey, and then even before that there was Gaius Marius and his fight with Sulla. So there's a lot of examples I could mine from there, but I would need a qualification. And the qualification would be something like, I could say something like, in some cases, competition can really propel a country forward, something like that. I could also say there are other ways in which young people should be prepared for government. I could say something like, rather than talk to them about cooperation, you could kind of emphasize more of an experiential approach. Try to give them experience, try to put them in jobs at a young age, and let them learn on the job, that kind of thing, right? Now just make sure I'm not okay. So it doesn't only focus on government, so I should probably say modern governments and institutions rely heavily on cooperation. Too much competition can spell disaster for an institution, something like that. The example still applies, ancient Rome. And then finally, in some cases, competition can propel a country or organization forward. And I should probably say in extreme cases, because it is my qualification. And then finally, I could also do this one here. So that's how I would plan it. Not that complicated. So let's get into Sunit's essay here. Okay, so Sunit starts by saying, a true leader leads by example, gets tasks accomplished, and is supported by those who are being led. Okay. We have seen examples of good leaders throughout history, such as Alexander the Great, Bill Gates, and Gandhi. But what creates such leaders? The prompt suggests that individuals have to learn a sense of cooperation instead of competition. I would argue that it takes both the ability to work together with others as well as a healthy level of competitive experience to mold a great leader because of two reasons. So this is pretty good. This is a pretty good introduction. In fact, I like it. And the main reason I like it is because of its clarity. I'm never confused about what Sunit's trying to say. It's very to the point. I know exactly where he stands. He even throws some examples in his introduction, which is not bad. He has a little bit of parallel structure going on here, which works. And then finally, the only thing I would say is see where he says it's both the ability to work together and a healthy level of competitive experience. Because he's using the word both here, I'm not sure he needs the two reasons here, because it seems like the outline is already established with the word both. So the outline, the purpose of the outline is to tell the reader the structure of your essay. And if I stop here, it's almost like I seem like I know the structure of his essay. I know he's going to address both sides and things like that. So because of two reasons, I'm not sure how necessary that is, but not a big deal. This is a good introduction. To begin with, there are situations when working together with an adversary is more beneficial than competing, I would say probably against them. And notice he says an adversary, that is singular, and then this is plural. So you would have to say him or her. So if you want to fix that, what you can do is just say with adversaries. Let's take the example of Cyrus the Great of ancient Persia. Cyrus was known as one of the greatest leaders of the Persian Empire, not solely because of how much land he conquered for the empire, but for the ways in which he did it. He was not known as a brutal invader, but as a bringer of peace and prosperity. He obtained new lands and kingdoms, oftentimes not through military conquest, but through diplomacy. This is a little bit awkward. I would probably phrase it like this: often through diplomacy rather than military conquest. I like his example. It's very specific. I haven't studied much about ancient Persia, but it seems accurate, and even if it's not entirely accurate, it still seems like it supports his point, because his point here is it's beneficial to work with people. One of his tactics was marrying a daughter of the land's leaders, thereby... So the land has more than one leader. So I think what he's trying to say is marrying a daughter of one of the land's leaders, thereby creating a tie of friendship. That's a little bit awkwardly phrased. Tie of friendship. How is that different than a friendship? And diplomacy. This approach is better than the more competitive one because it uses fewer resources, prevents deaths, and instills less animosity in the people that are being conquered. Good, that's a good sentence. A rebuttal could be that not being harsher to the conquered peoples may allow them to consider rebellion. I would say to that, so this right here, you can put an I here. I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal. But if you use too many personal pronouns, it can kind of give the impression that you're not being very formal or your writing is not academic. And he's also reusing this structure from the introduction, again, which is not a big problem, but just something to think about. I would say to that is pretty informal. This whole thing right here is a little bit too informal. That if a people, that's a pretty big mistake right there. If a person avoided war, didn't have any relatives die, and still retained his or her wealth, then he or she. So let's go ahead and just keep it as people, just so we don't have to change everything. That if people avoided war, didn't have any relatives die, and still retained their wealth, then they would most likely not rebel. Okay, I'm not sure if it's necessary to introduce a counterpoint inside a body paragraph that supports your thesis. So to me, the structure seems a little bit weird, because if you come up here, he says both are necessary, but then right here, he's saying that it is not necessary. So to me, the structure is a little bit wonky. I think this entire paragraph should just focus on when it's better to use cooperation rather than competition. And I probably personally would not introduce a rebuttal here. Not a huge problem because he does rebut it, which means he does maintain the focus. I'm just wondering how he's going to support that competition is also good after shutting down the idea of competition. But he did shut it down in a very specific context of rebellion. All right. Finally implies that there's more than one, like more than two, I mean. So I wouldn't use finally here. I would say, however, to become a leader, comma, one needs to have a strong sense of competition. Take, for example, the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Again, I probably wouldn't use modern politics as an example. That's just my personal opinion because we don't have the benefit of hindsight. It was a very aggressive campaign from both the Trump side as well as Hillary's. The goal of each candidate was to win the presidency, so that's pretty obvious, comma. So they could lead the country in the way they saw fit. This sentence really doesn't tell me much. This sentence is almost like filler. However, to achieve that goal, they had to first win a fiercely fought competition, which involved not just the basic debates over policy, but smear campaigns. One might argue, see how he's reusing these structures here? One might argue that this level, aggressive, is spelled wrong. Competition brings out the worst in candidates, such as when Trump threatened to put his adversary in jail. I would argue, see he's reusing this, that instead the competition puts each candidate on top of their mental game. Well, each candidate should be his or her mental game and prepares him or her for adversaries. This paragraph seems a bit weak in my mind. I don't feel persuaded. I thought the ancient Persian example was pretty strong. It showed me the importance of cooperation and diplomacy. Here, this doesn't really show me the importance of competition. Yeah, I mean, we have a winner, but it doesn't really show me that, like, for example, even if they weren't competitive with each other, you still only have one president. You know, the outcome is the same with competition or without competition. So that's why I don't find this body paragraph overly persuasive. Answering the question of what makes a leader a good leader a little bit repetitive is not easy to answer. Again, a little bit repetitive. This sentence is repetitive. However, comma, taking a black and white stance on it is not realistic. We can see from the examples of Cyrus the Great and the president that it takes both. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can see that clearly. I'm not entirely convinced. This is not a bad essay. Definitely above average. I see two possibilities. For example, he could get a 4.0 from the human and a 4.0 from the computer, and then the average would be 4.0. He could also get a 4.0 from the human, which I think is likely, maybe a 5.0 from the computer, maybe not though, which would equal like a 4.5, or it could be vice versa. But I'm pretty sure what we're looking at here is a 4.0 all around. Maybe a 4.5 depending on the day, depending on what grader you run into. But for me, I'm going to say 4.0. So what would I clean up? I would just clean up a lot of these small mistakes, a little bit too informal, some of the language. We have a couple grammar mistakes. This body paragraph doesn't seem overly persuasive to me. We have some repetition. The introduction is pretty good, except with this I thought was not really necessary. Yeah, so with that in mind, not terrible, but not perfect. I would definitely call this solidly above average.